Welcome, Saeed. Thanks for joining the Product Guru Insights from 25 Friday. I'm very happy to talk to you. First, I would like to explain a little bit about 25 Friday, what we do. We are a product management consulting firm in the Netherlands, and we also have nearshore development capacity with a development team based in Portugal. So we kind of host these chats to have a nice digital fireside chat about product management topics in general, and that our guests feel very passionate about. And for those that do not roam LinkedIn or Medium in the product space, because I think if you do, you would be a very familiar name to come across. Could you explain a little bit about who you are, Saeed?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm happy to be here. So my name is Saeed Khan. I've been working in product management forever. My first product management job was back in 1997, although I had worked with product managers for times before that. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. I have some stories from way, way back if anyone cares. Um, but for the last, 20 whatever years, 7 years, I think, since 1997, I've been working in product management. I spent time in the Bay Area, working in startups as well as in sort of public companies. And I've been in Canada now, back in Canada since 2006. Again, working in product management in startups and other companies. And then for the last 7 years, I can't believe it's been 7 years, but it's been 7 years since 2017. I've been working as an independent consultant, helping technology companies and technology organizations with product related issues. So I like to say I help them build better products and better product organizations.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we could really benefit from a lot of your insights. I was just wondering, how's the product scene in Canada?
It's good. Like it's mixed, I would say, but generally it's good. Like certainly compared to I don't know, 10 years ago, things have really blossomed. Um, I think I mean, first of all, there's a lot of tech companies here. Some of them are US companies that have opened big offices in Canada, like Google, Amazon, etc. But there's a lot of homegrown companies. I was actually just talking to a company today, actually a friend of mine, she works at a company. Um, and I'd kind of heard of it before, but I didn't realize they were based in Toronto and they're 30 years old. That's wow. Like that's like, sort of as long as I've been doing product management, even longer. So yeah, there's been a tech scene here for a long time, but it's really grown a lot in the last 10 years with a lot of startups. I mean, you might know that AI, so Jeffrey Hinton, who's one of the sort of known as the godfathers of AI, he's based in Toronto, and there's been kind of a real kind of core set of AI companies that came out of that, as well as like a lot of the grad students from University of Toronto went to larger companies as well, both here in Canada and the US. And then Montreal, and I forget his name, there's another very significant player in AI based in Montreal. And so you have these two cities in Canada which have like really strong AI talent. And that's driving a lot of interesting dynamics as well. So yeah, generally it's pretty good.
Oh, that sounds pretty awesome. I didn't know that it was that much of an AI presence in Canada. I do think that with regards to blossoming, the Netherlands tech scene is also blossoming in the past 10 years. Obviously, we're always looking at London or Berlin, and I think over the past couple of years, it's blossoming here as well in a
Yeah.
different way. But well, thank you for the introduction. And yeah, let's dive into our first segment. It's a topic that you actually care about. You write a lot of topics. You write a lot of articles on Medium, and one of them is discussing the problem versus solutions space in product management. So maybe you could explain to me, myself, and the audience, why is this one of the topics that you are passionate about?
So a lot of the work that I do is really, like I said, I help build companies build better products and better product organizations. And a lot of the work is really fundamental work in helping them understand what problems they're really trying to solve, what markets they're going after, how to think about problems in a way that's meaningful, right? Um, I was talking to a couple of guys last week, and they have a startup, and they have like pre customer, but they built a bunch of things, and they're working with a couple of companies to sort of eventually be customers. And I asked them, what problems are you solving, right? And and I got a lot of like featurey kind of responses. Well, we built this and it does this and it does this. And I mean they're earnest. I think they're on to something. I won't say what they're doing, but talking about solutions is kind of the default thing for us, right? Like in school, what are we taught? Like, what's the answer, right? We're given a problem, solve it. Here's the answer, right? We don't spend a lot of time really thinking about and understanding how to define what problems are, right? Like no one says, here's a bunch of information, figure out what the problems are, and then figure out what the solutions are. And so our minds are very much in solution mode, and we jump into solution thinking very easily. It's more exciting. Oh, we could do this, versus thinking about problems which are more abstract. But in our jobs, right, as product people, we are told, live in the solution, live in the problem space, right? Understand the problem. Some just say love the problem. Um, and yet there isn't really a good language or a good way of thinking about problems. And so I think it's really an area that needs attention. It's really important. If you can define a problem really clearly, then you can solve it really well, right? Like I have a quote from somebody, I forget who said it, but it goes something like, the quality of your solution depends almost entirely on your understanding of the problem, right? And so I think it's just fundamental stuff. It's sort of bread and butter stuff that we need to talk about more. It's not hard once you start thinking about it, but once you start thinking about it, it can change the way you operate. And you stay away from that solution mode and, you know, let's build something and let's deliver something. And, like this whole build, measure, learn thing, like it starts with build, which I think is absolutely the worst thing to start with, but let's build something and then let's go learn about it. Well, you know what? Why don't we go learn about it first, then figure out what we should build so we can learn better if you really want to learn from building. So anyway, long answer to your question. I think it's just really important to dig into it, understand it, and then leverage that in the work that we do.
Yeah. Well, we actually had a talk recently on discovery, and we talked about a couple of frameworks. And one of them obviously uses the double diamond and starting up such a loop, a build, merge, and learn loop. But often so you want to really start with basically design thinking regarding a problem space. Does that relate into the direction that you just hinted at? Is make sure that you understand the problem fully, that you really dig in and don't let yourself be time boxed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we say understand the problem, right, that like it has many dimensions. And so thinking about it from when you think about like this double diamond, there's sort of generative research, evaluative research, and you're going deep, going wide, etc. I think that's a starting point. I think it's a good starting point. Um, I think being able to articulate problems as well, right? So part of the issue I've seen, and it's not just with problems, it's with other things as well. We are often either constrained by language or bound by language. And what I mean by that is, and again, I'm an English speaker, and I had this conversation with someone who was a native German speaker, and it was interesting because she said, "Wow, we don't use a word like that. Like there was some word we are talking about, and they said, oh, the word in German is very different. It means this." And so I'll use the English sort of language as the basis, sort of saying, I acknowledge that other languages may have the same problem, but maybe not always. Um, but we are often bound by the words we use in a language because they have meaning and they have implications. So when someone says roadmap, right, like it can mean different things to different people, right? And I always find that like clarification is important. Or when someone says MVP. It could mean different things to different people.
Yeah,
Uh,
and to get departments.
yeah, absolutely. I'm a bit of a stickler about language because I think language is a great tool. I think language can be used to clarify. I think language can be used to focus. But unfortunately, if we don't use language well, we can confuse and we can, kind of defocus. And so when we talk about problem, right? Like, well, whose problem? Like, who has this problem? Like, who exactly has this problem? Like, tell us about the people that have this problem. Like, what are their characteristics, right? Why do they think this is a problem? Um, and what kind of a problem is this? A big problem? Is it their biggest priority? Is it their smallest priority? Is it somewhere in between? How painful is it? How urgent is it? How, kind of critical is it, etc. Like there's lots of dimensions to problems. And so I think digging into these things using, discovery as a way to understand the context is critical. And so, the more time you spend on understanding the problem, I don't know what the numbers would be, but the less time you spend debating about the solution. Like if you say, yeah, um, you know, like it's the classic example. I don't know how true it is, but there was this when they sent people up into space, and how do you write in space when there's no gravity? And then the U.S. created this special zero gravity pen that had pressurized ink, and you could write in space. And then the Russians used a pencil. Now, like, okay, both are solutions to the problem. Now, the pencil gives other problems you may not want. Like you don't want graphite particles floating around in your spaceship and maybe coming into contact with electrical equipment. But again, lots of ways to understand the problem and then different solutions depending on your constraints. Um, so I think that's the kind of thinking you really need to understand is what are the implications of this problem? We talk about user problems, right? What's the user
Yeah.
problem? But that's not the only type of problem. There's other problems as well, other characteristics of those problems.
So with those, with this pattern of really analyzing and, well, I guess what I want to ask you is how deep should you go? When does it limit yourself? Yeah, in for example, practicality. I mean, you can investigate until you, well, uh, until you fade away. Basically, it can be a sinkhole of your time. How do you prevent that?
Um, well, okay, so I think this is where just reason needs to come in, right? Like you do the discovery until you have as much confidence as you need to make the decisions you need to make, right? Like these things don't happen in a vacuum. Like we want to do something. Okay, let's say it's something small, something very, you know, non-consequential. Um, you don't need to do a lot because the risk is low, right? Like we just need to, maybe there's an assumption we want to test and that's it. Let's go implement it. And then, worst case scenario, we can undo it, right? It's something small and inconsequential. Or if it's a
Yeah.
really big decision that's critical and it's very difficult to undo, then you want to really get into, the details of, okay, what are all the assumptions? What are the key assumptions we have to test? What do we need to know to make a high confidence decision? It doesn't have to be certainty, right? Because there is no certainty.
Yeah.
But you want to make high confidence decisions when there's a lot of risk. And so you need more time, obviously. Um, I think that the challenge here is that, again, this goes back to language. We can say things like high confidence, we can say things like low risk, but how do you really articulate that in ways that are not ambiguous, right? Like to me, low risk might be different than for you, and we may be working together, right? You might see something as very easy because you have certain knowledge and certain experience. Maybe I don't have that, so I don't see that thing as easy. So we have to be able to articulate these things, make them explicit, and then evaluate them in some way. And I think that like having frameworks and kind of common models to understand problems is really important. And it's important in everything we do. But given that understanding problems is so fundamental, we should be confident that we have alignment on are we really solving this problem? I remember a conversation I had once with someone, and he had sent an email, and I had misread the email. And so I called him up, and I started asking him a question, and he assumed I had read his email. Like he asked me, "Did you read the email?" I said, "Yeah, I read the email," but he didn't say, "Did you read the email correctly?" Because I thought I had read it correctly, and I didn't. And we went back and forth, and he couldn't understand why I was like, just I didn't get it. And he said something in the conversation, and then I was like, "Wait a minute, that's not what you wrote in the email. You wrote something else." I was going to say, and I wanted to prove to him that he was contradicting himself. So I went back to the email, and I was like, "Oh, you said that in the email, and you just said it again. I thought you said it." All of a sudden, all our issues got resolved. But it was just such a simple thing. But I was just completely like wrong fundamentally. I had read it, I'd misread it, I'd misinterpreted, and I had the wrong assumptions. And so that kind of stuff happens a lot. And it's not that anyone's intention. I wasn't trying to be, like kind of confrontational. I just was coming at it from a very different perspective. And I think that that's the kind of stuff you want to get early on, get rid of, eliminate. And so, yeah, are we addressing the same problem, thinking about it in the same way, understanding with the same context, right? And like, if we come to engineering with a problem, hey, customer has this problem, da, 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 da. They didn't talk to the customer. They didn't talk to all the customers we've talked to. Maybe they talked to some. They're looking at it from an engineering perspective. I'm looking at it from a product management perspective, whatever that is, right? Like we have to work to find that common ground and then move forward. And that's again, when we talk about problem space versus solution space is easier because it's tangible. Like, oh, we'll have a dialogue. We'll do this. We'll the back end will do that. Much more tangible. The problem much less tangible, and so we just have to work at it.
Yeah, navigating those waters can be tricky. It's
Yes.
also actually a nice segue into a follow-up question about, for example, the influence of large or strategic customers. How do we balance the influence of those or their needs with broader market needs that we might find out, or actually something that's contradictory to the problem that we're actually wanting to solve, but it's just the influence of one of these large accounts, for example. Or
Yeah.
how do we balance that?
So I think, yeah. So it's funny. I actually wrote an article on that. We can share that in the notes. So our job in product management, let's take a step back and say our job in product management is to drive product success, right? Like it's really at a fundamental level, that's the core job, right? It's a cross-functional role, and we're thinking into the future. And so we should have done our homework. Like this is something that I see a lot of companies don't do, but product management has to do their job. Sales is doing their job. Sales is out selling. They're coming back. This is what we need to close this deal. That's their job, and we have to realize that their job isn't to make our life difficult. Their job is to sell, and that's what they're paid for, and that's how they're compensated. So our job is to think about where the product and the company is going and what's the best pathway to get there through our products, and then drive that into the company. And so when you get influential customers, yeah, like that's a reality of B2B product management. You have to have a way to frame that discussion. So we let's just say this: we're headed in a certain direction. We should have a clear product vision. We should have defined clear objectives, business objectives and product objectives, right? Business objectives, hopefully more than revenue objectives, but in terms of how to win in the market, right? Like product has to define that, product has to understand that. And then we are going to lay out, quote, quote, roadmap, some pathway forward. Now, it doesn't mean that we've decided and there's only one path forward, right? But based on what we knew at the time, here's where we're headed. And then sales comes in. Well, now we can evaluate whatever sales is asking for in the context of where we're going. And when I say we, it's not just product decided and kept it a secret, right? Product works cross-functioning. We've had these discussions with management, right? With other leaders, including sales leadership, right? Here's where we're going. So now if sales comes in and says, hey, there's this thing, and it's sort of along the lines of where we're going, we have some leeway to figure out, okay, how do we accommodate this, right? Now, if it's something out in left field or right field or wherever you want to put it, then we have to look at it from a business perspective, right? And that's the frame. It's not like, oh, look, they're going to ruin our roadmap. We're not going to be able to, like, we have to look at it from a business perspective. Okay, because we're playing the long game, right? Sales is playing the short game. Sales is playing the short game of, I got to close this deal. We're playing the long game, which is, where are we headed in the next 1, 2, 3 years? How are we going to get there? And so you have to bring that in and evaluate it. And I have an article where I wrote about this, and there's a framework, and it basically has 2 axes. One is sort of alignment with your product direction roadmap, and then the other is sort of, the difficulty or the challenge that you face, right? And if, for example, if something doesn't align, is technically very challenging, why are you going to do it, right? It's going to cost, it's got high risk, it's got issues. If something aligns with your roadmap, generally speaking, and is low risk, it's almost no brainer. Like, of course, why would we not do that? We're going to win the deal. It's not going to distract us. It's something we can sell and apply to other customers or into the future. And then the other 2 are a bit nebulous, and you have to kind of do a bit of work. But the point is, you're having that discussion in the context of where you're going from a product perspective, right? If you have that, it makes for a much better discussion because you've got that alignment in the company already to work from, right? If you don't have that, then the only thing that you have is the sales context. Well, there's a big deal. Oh, but it needs this. Well, what are you working on? Are you working on anything important? No. Like, you basically don't have a leg to stand on that point. So I think the real issue when it comes to working with these large influential customers is the company, not just product. The company has to have clarity of direction. Management has to have alignment, and you have to make those decisions in the context of that. And sometimes, and I've seen this happen both ways. Sometimes the management team themselves will say, yeah, you know what? This is not something we would normally do. It's going to be a distraction, but the other benefits to the company, not just the revenue, but the influence with this customer, maybe this is something you can announce and market. Maybe there's other benefits. You're looking at building a tighter relationship, whatever it is. Those are the benefits that are going to drive the decision, right? So I've seen that happen where, the cost or the distraction was significant, but it had other benefits. Now, sometimes companies regret those kind of decisions, but I've also seen it the other way. I've seen a CEO who, there was a deal that came in, it was a huge deal, but it had a huge custom component, and the CEO said, no, I'm not going to take that revenue because the distraction is too big, right? The opportunity cost, what else we could have done with those resources versus building out what this one company wants is not worth it. So I think that's the level. Sometimes product people are part of those decisions. Sometimes they're not, but the responsibility of the product people, and I'll say this, in particular, the product leaders, because we talk about product managers a lot. We don't talk as much about product leaders. The product leaders have to have that framework in place. It's their job to put that structure in place so the product managers and product teams can align to it. And I think that's a big problem, that a lot of product leaders don't do that. I talked to one guy once, and I said, do you see yourself as a product leader or a facilitator? Because everything he was talking about was more facilitation of the work of the product team. And he said, I see myself as a facilitator. And I was like, really? Like, how are you leading them then? Right. And he did not come from a product background. So I think he felt a little imposter syndrome. But product leaders have to put that framework in place, meaning a clear vision, clear direction, clear strategy, so that, and then communicating that out so that the company is aligned.
Yeah. If only also to maintain your own sanity, I guess.
Well, yeah, I agree with you on that 100%. But I think a lot of leaders, product leaders who come in, especially who haven't done the job themselves, right? I see people coming in from engineering a lot who've never done sort of external product work. I signed with someone recently, their head of product, their VP of product came from QA and became, kind of VP of product over time. Like they don't have that experience of having done the job, the individual contributor job and work their way up through the product ranks. And so they don't have models of what it means to be a real product leader, right? They're just working. Like if you come from engineering, you're good. Well, engineering is the mindset you have, and you're not going to be able to drive the change that's needed in the product org, right? Product needs to be an independent organization, just like engineering, just like sales, just like marketing. And all of them have to have their influence and all of them work together to drive business and product success. But if product is subservient to sales or product is subservient to engineering,
Yeah.
you're not going to be empowered to do the things you need to do.
You hit the nail on its head again. The problem that me and my colleague often see is that if you have, like, for example, a fast scaling startup or a scale up itself, basically, and they've learned how to do things their way. They've been successful, and the company is growing. But the people that were there from the start didn't really understand what it would mean to work in a software development company that's being guided by product. Now, there are people in product roles that do not per se have the product background, but they have the background of the company, which can
Yes.
be actually a really good thing, but it can also be very difficult to scale further.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I think strong product leadership is like a force multiplier for a company because when you have these sales deals coming in, right? Usually what happens is the revenue is what takes priority, right? Like there's a deal, revenue, and no one looks at the cost of that revenue. And the cost being, the time to implement whatever custom work that's done, the lost time that engineering work could have been put into product, right? So then you have to support that thing that you built. Maybe it's something you think, well, maybe we could sell to other customers, but maybe it's not a good fit. So then you're adding more expense. Like I talked to a company once, and it was funny. They had done some analysis, and they said there was a deal they did, and there was something that they got $50,000 for custom work, but they knew that the 50,000 was not going to cover their cost. That their cost would have been more. But they felt, well, even still, the 50,000 subsidizes it, and we can sell this, to whoever else. Turns out they never really sold it that much. Like they might have sold it to one or two people, and they figured out the cost overall, like their entire sales cost, marketing, all the things they did was somewhere around $1 million. So,
Wow.
so they got, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue, let's say, but their expense was all in around $1 million. And you're just like, yeah, if more companies did that work up front, they might not have those kind of disasters, and they might actually be further ahead on the product side.
Yeah. Well, somewhat staying in this space, because I think some of it, what we're talking about, is regarding feature factories, right?
Yeah.
So if we are, for example, I am a product manager working in a feature factory. Um, how can I shift focus from solutions to problems, and how can I get out of the feature factory? Do you have any advice?
Well, you can leave, right?
Yeah.
That's one way to get out. So I always come back to this is where's the product leader? Like where is the VP of product, head of product, chief product officer, whatever? And what are they doing? Because that's where the change has to like be driven from, right? Like individual product managers can be change agents, but it's not a personal change, it's an organizational change. And the product leader needs to be driving that because think about it, it's an operational model, right? It's how the company operates, right? So when we say feature factory, we're talking about a company where decisions are made at the top by leadership, and those decisions in terms of what to build are sent down, and people are told, add this thing, do this, do that, satisfy this customer need. And then you're essentially executing on those orders. Uh, and that's not something like an individual product manager can't go to the senior leadership team and say, hey, stop telling us what to do. We want to be empowered. We want to be, we want to be solving problems, not implementing solutions, like whatever. You have to come at it from an organizational perspective and that leadership perspective. So the product leader themselves, whoever they are, he or she, needs to be the driver of that change. They need to educate the management team. They need to show them the opportunity that is being missed or the opportunity that is available if we change how we function. They have to start small and show the benefits. And they have to bring their team, but also other teams along with them. And that's it. Like, I don't think, quite frankly, an individual product manager is equipped to make that change or has the influence to make that change. I mean, they can complain, they can talk, they can, try and educate. But if their own product leader isn't taking charge of that, you have to wonder why.
Yeah. Sadly, I see a lot of situations with companies in the Netherlands that there is a very small team and it's founder driven, and then they do their first product hire, which is a junior PM or a product owner, and that's that. There's no product leadership. It's just the founding team driving the product manager or product owner.
Yeah.
So
in that case, okay, so that's a kind of a specific situation. So in that case, if you have a founder-driven organization and it's a small organization, that's the reality, right? The founder is essentially acting as the product leader. Now, whether they are acting as a good product leader or not is a different question. I think one of the mistakes that companies make is their first product hire is how you described as a junior person, right? It's sort of like, hey, there's all this work to do. Who can I delegate the grunt work to? Okay, let's hire a product manager. I've been the first product manager in a couple of companies, founder-driven companies, and it's challenging, right? It's challenging because you need to have experience in that. You need to have done it before. You can't just be like, 2 or 3 years as a product manager and, you're going to start taking orders. Like, we hired a product manager, solving all our problems. I mean, that's where problems start, is you don't hire a leader, right? Like, imagine you were doing the same thing. You said, we need to hire a salesperson, and you hired a junior salesperson. Like, how successful is that going to be, right? It's not. Like, you would hire a sales leader. We need someone who can build, who can drive sales, and then build a sales organization. That's the way you'd think about it. You'd probably think the same way from a marketing perspective, right? We need to hire someone who can do the marketing, but can become the marketing leader, or is a marketing leader and can build a marketing organization. So that same thing has to be there in product. Product is like as critical, I would say more, but I don't want to downplay sales and marketing, but it's as critical as sales and marketing, right? It's upstream to sales and marketing as well. So you need to have people who understand the downstream impacts, understand sales, understand marketing, how things will flow, how to work with those teams. That's not a junior person. So if you think hiring a junior person is solving your problem, it's not. It's delaying the problems and maybe exacerbating them in the long term, because you're not getting leverage for that person. You're just offloading certain work. I'm not saying that it'll always fail, but I think the best thing a company can do early on is when they have their first true product hire, is hire someone more senior than you think you need, right? I think the challenge some companies face is they go, well, we want someone hands-on who can roll up their sleeves. And yes, of course. just
Who can
because you've
create
been
a
in
roadmap?
management. Sorry?
Who can create a roadmap for us?
Yeah, who can create a roadmap, yeah. But what you want is someone who can understand that, but understand it at an organizational level. Because what you're actually doing when you're hiring that first product person is you're making an organizational change. And that change has impact across teams. And then you want them to be able to build a team. And so you want them to understand what that team has to look like. And the only way they're going to understand that is by being in the company and seeing the dynamics. So I think that's something. And by the way, I don't know if you know who Bill Campbell was. Is this name familiar to you?
It does ring a bell, but I can't conjure up the yeah.
Yeah, so Bill Campbell, he was kind of a giant in Silicon Valley. He was chairman of Intuit at one point. He was the president of Claris, which was Apple's software arm for a while. And there's a book about him called, I think it's called The $1 Billion Coach or something. He was an advisor to a lot of tech companies. And he had that, and it's funny because I had a blog post about years ago. He passed away, I think 5 or 6 years ago, before the pandemic. But he was at a conference and he was giving a talk. I think this is maybe like 2010 or something. And the moderator asked him, like, you're a startup founder, you're building your company. Who's your first management hire? And he said, a product management or product marketing leader, something like that. And I was like, yes, like, absolutely. And he basically said, like, someone who understands the technology and who understands business, who understands how to bring them together and make the product successful, right? So absolutely, because that's your business, right? Product success drives business success, right? They're in a startup, they're almost identical. Like, the difference between the business success and product success in an early stage startup is like very, very little. And so
Yeah.
that's what you want to have. And I think that's it. He's talking about hiring a leader, right? He's not talking about hiring a junior person. And I think that's something that startup founders should really understand.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. I already made a joke about it, about just build me a roadmap. But it's not something that you just do. It's connected to almost everything we just talked about. Um, I remember I was searching for content, intelligent content regarding roadmaps and whatnot, as we were having a product circle, which is one of our meetups on this topic. And that's when I came across a LinkedIn post, and we had a little back and forth on LinkedIn, where you explained me the roadmap as a strategy document. And yeah, I was very intrigued. Can you explain to the to the uninformed, or to the new people hearing this for the first time, what do you mean with a strategy document?
Sure. Yeah, so I think this is part of that whole language problem that I talked about earlier, right? Because the word roadmap has a common English, I'll use again English, right? Common language usage, right? Like, people can talk about, the roadmap to success or this and that. Like, so, but when we talk about product, I think we have to be very clear that the word roadmap has a specific meaning. And you can, it's not just me saying this. There's, lots of stuff written about this. So, a roadmap is the output of a strategy process. So I say I have a line to distinguish roadmaps and plans. I say a roadmap is about direction and strategy. A plan is about commitment and delivery, right? And that distinction is really important, right? The plan is about delivery. It's been scoped and de-risked, and you're really focusing on what the outputs will be. Whereas the roadmap, it contains things you will deliver on, but it's really tied to objectives and strategy. So it's the things we must do or we must accomplish in some time frames, right? It's not necessarily dates, but some time frames that are outputs of our strategy that help us achieve our objectives. So for example, and I use this example just because it's hopefully it's easy to understand. You want to go climb a mountain. Now, you have to have some clear objectives, like what mountain you want to climb, when you want to climb it, etc. And so let's just say I want to climb Mount Everest. and I want to do it in 2 years. Okay, so 2 years time. And the thing is that, like, if I want to do it in 1 year time versus 2 years time, huge difference, right? In terms of planning, the details and so on. But in terms of a strategy, like, my strategy wouldn't be that much different because, oh, and I don't know anything about which face is easy or not, but let's just assume the north face is the face we'll use to climb, and our strategy will include, certain milestones in terms of how we're going to get up there, and then what training we'll do and the time frames for training. Like, there are things that you can talk about at that level that don't get into what must be done by what date, right? So in order to achieve this goal of climbing Mount Everest, there's some training that has to be done. We have to equip ourselves. We have to get a team together. We have to, set up base camp a certain way, etc. I'm not a mountain climber, so I'm just sort of talking out loud. But and there's things you won't do, right? And so the approach you take and how you do it, that's the strategy. And then those outputs of that strategy are the roadmap. So, and let's just say the time frame was 2 years. So in the next 6 months, these are the things we have to accomplish. In the following 6 months, these are the things we have to accomplish, etc. Now, if we got to the plan would be much more detailed in terms of what equipment we have to buy, what training we have to do, specifically what milestones we have to reach, when we have to get to Nepal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that distinction of direction in strategy for a roadmap is really important. The roadmap feeds into the plan, but it contains all the key things we must accomplish. We can do lots of other stuff, right? I haven't mentioned, maybe we want to take a side trip to someplace, or, maybe there's something else we want to do before we go to maybe in order to prepare for climbing Everest, we want to climb another mountain first, just so we can get that experience. Who knows? All that stuff is the plan. The strategy, we'll talk about training and things like that. So it's a bit of a hand-waving discussion, but this idea of the key elements to achieve your objective are part of your strategy, and those are the outputs, and then the details are what go into your plan.
I really like your example. It's it brings back the map context of roadmap to help you solve this problem of climbing that mountain. How do I get there? What do we roughly need to do?
Yes. And also what we won't do, right? Like, we're not going to go on the east face, and we're not, because we've chosen, right, the north face. We're not going to, like, train on site. We're going to train somewhere else, right? Like those things.
Yeah, and there are many options to choose from in solving this particular problem. I know you're not a fan of prioritization, but how do I figure out what of these options to solve my problem is actually the best, or should I choose in this particular scenario, without, for example, a framework?
Okay, so just to be clear, to be clear, I am a fan of prioritization. I'm not a fan of certain prioritization frameworks that get used in product discussions. Okay, so I've written about it, but like Rice and WSJF and these formulaic, prioritization frameworks, I'm not a fan of them at all. And the reason being that, and we can use either one. Let's use Rice because it's more familiar with people. They do a bunch of things that do not help you. So first of all, Rice, reach, impact, confidence, effort, right? That's what Rice stands for. All of them are guesstimates. They are like guesses. Like, so first of all, the distinction of only those four is and nothing else is a problem, because perhaps reach isn't as important to you. Why would I'm doing something that's very important. It's very important for a segment of the market. Reach is not a factor, right? But reach is always there in that firmness. So first of all, this idea of, these four factors are being the only factors you use, I think, is a problem. I think the second thing is that all of them are guesstimates, right? They're not analytical numbers. Like, what's impact? Oh, it's high. Why is it high? Because Fred said so, you know? Well, I don't think it's high. I think it's medium. Why? Well, like, and then you multiply them out, and then you get some number, and that number is full of, like, there's a huge margin of error. And then you use that to rank things. Like, it's stupid, quite frankly. Like, mathematically, it's invalid, and you can look up why it's mathematically invalid. But B, it doesn't really help you, right? People say, oh, but it does. We use it and we have good discussions. Sure, have the discussion. Don't use the formula, right? But the other big problem is that it doesn't tie back to strategy and objectives, right? Like, the prioritization that people should be thinking about is, what are we trying to achieve? How do we want to go about it? How does this support that? And if it supports your strategy and objectives, great, do it. If it doesn't, or weakly, then say, okay, are there alternatives? Are there different things we can do, right? That everything should always go back to, what are we trying to achieve, right?
Yeah.
Like, you could have a huge rice score, but it doesn't tie back to your objectives. What have you gained, right? Like, well, should you do it because it's got a good score? Like, is it? And the other factor that I think is really important, and this is a bit more subtle, is that there's a distinction between priority, which is importance, and sequencing, which is order that you do the work. Sometimes you have to do less important work first because the more important work depends on it, right? There's dependencies on the work you do, right? So the example I'll say is, like, a roof on a house is really important, but I can't do it first. Okay? I got to do other stuff first. WSJF, literally in their description, if you go to their webpage, calls itself both a prioritization and sequencing method, which I think is just completely wrong. Like, weighted shortest job first, right? It even has it in the name. It's about sequencing, right? It's not about priority. What's important and what you do first, not the same. And yet that's what they're promoting. Like, you do the most important thing first. Well, you know what? Not always. The most important thing should be tied to strategy. There's nothing in weighted shortest job first that talks about strategy. So again, like, if you have no strategy, sure, use whatever formula you want, because you have nothing else to base your work on. But the strategy is a great tool. It's, I think, a force multiplier. Companies that understand strategy, make really good choices, and stay focused, probably win more often than not.
Yeah. So what would you suggest if I feel I'm in a situation where I have to choose from multiple different situations or paths to success of fulfilling all my objectives, basically, and I can do it method A, B, or C. How do I go about?
Okay, so that's a bit of an abstract question. So let's assume your objective is clear. Like, you either have defined clear objectives or you've been given a very clear objective, right? And that's not always the case, but let's assume that is the case here. So, all things being equal, if you can solve a problem multiple different ways, if you can reach your objective multiple different ways, choose the path that is easiest, that also doesn't confine you in the future, right? So those are two kind of counterweighing things. So if we go back to the Mount Everest story, if the question is, how do I climb Mount Everest in 2 years? Am I going to go in winter on the toughest route, or am I going to go in the summer on the easiest route with the most help? All things being equal, I'll take the second, right? Because my goal is just to climb Mount Everest. Now, if my goal is to climb Mount Everest and, set some record along the way, and I don't know what that record might be, but let's just assume there's some record or there's some other milestone, then I have to take that into account. So I think the point being that, particularly in product, right, Like we can always hack something, right? You could hack something in, but that might be the easiest way, but it might constrain you in the future. So what you want to do is have it, and this is where strategy is important, right? Like, what's our strategy? Is our strategy just to solve this problem and we'll never come back to it because it's a one-off thing? Great. That's that's fine. Hack it in and leave it there, and no one else will have to worry about it. But if it's something we need to do and we want to build on, then say, okay, of the choices we have, which one? All of them solve the problem. Which one meets those needs the best? And then, you know, be explicit about it. Say we're choosing B because not only does it solve the problem, yes, it's a little more work, but it keeps our options open and we get this other benefit from it, right? And have those discussions quite frankly, so people
Yeah.
understand that like we're making decisions for good reasons, right? Not just because Fred thinks it's the best way to do it. But again, we're thinking about the objective, right? We have an objective in mind. We're not just randomly picking what we need to do. I think that's one of the biggest problems, quite frankly, in product today is that a lot of work is done without clear common objectives, right? We did it, we delivered it. Okay, so what? Right? That's not your job. Your job is to actually achieve something, not just deliver something.
Yeah. I guess no, I reckon we talked about this. Something in the back of my mind popped up. It's a little bit opposite to the entrepreneurial spirit of founders, for example, who act with 25% of information available to them to just go into execution and to try just to fuck around and find out, basically, to see if it works, and if it works, we'll go with that and we'll jump on the next thing. Yeah, so it would be a more strategic, here we go, approach to doing that.
Yeah. So I could replace the word strategic with thoughtful, right?
Okay, yeah,
So here's the thing, right? You use the word entrepreneurial, and I think it depends on what your impression or understanding of the word entrepreneurial is. Like when I think of an entrepreneur, I think it's, someone, usually individuals, but it could be a group of people who want to build something of value, something successful. And why would you do it in a random manner? Like, why would you just try and guess, what, like, if I have limited resources. So I worked in one of my first summer jobs way back was in a publishing company. And I spent most of the summer working with this publisher who was planning out a brand new magazine. And I was creating all these spreadsheets and things for him. And he taught me about publishing as well. And then I went back the next summer, and my boss, I had the same boss. The publisher had left. And I said to him, oh, what happened with that magazine? Because I had spent the summer sort of in the planning. And he said, oh, it failed. And I said, oh, why? Like, because, I felt bad, like all this work I did, And he said, well, because they got everything they asked for. And I didn't understand what he meant, right? Like I was in university. I didn't understand. Like, how could you fail if you got everything you asked for? And he said, because they didn't have to make any tough decisions. They just, like, the company basically threw money at this venture. And so they just executed. They did stuff, they fucked around and found out. Right? Like they basically didn't have to think about what they were doing. They just did. And I think when I think of the word entrepreneur, I think it's about really thinking about what you're doing because you're working in a constrained environment and you want to be able to make, on average, better decisions, right? Higher confidence decisions that have some backing and have some follow through. So I think, yeah, it's a thoughtful approach. You could call it a strategic approach. But to me, it's just business. It's just business. Like, why would I just randomly do things? Let's build something and launch it and see what happens. Because lean startup. No, not a good approach, right? Especially in days like now, we're getting data is so much easier. We can talk to people, we can interview people, we can collect data from websites, we can, there's so much information out there. Why would we not leverage that? And because we're playing the long game, right? This is the thing. Product is the long game. It's not the short game, right? I said earlier, sales is a short game. Product is the long game, right? We want to build something that lasts, something that grows, something that scales and is successful. Let's build a foundation, right? Build an organization that can support that. And I don't know, like I don't have any other way of explaining. Like, to me, that's just good business. It's not product, it's not this, it's just good business, right? Because the alternative is luck. And sometimes it happens. But not something.
Also not. Yeah, no. Well, I'm just looking at the time, and I think we've covered many very important topics. That most notably the problems versus solutions space, roadmaps, and how to do good business. So I think I think anyone could learn a lot from listening to your feedback on these topics. I was just wondering, is there anything you would like to express or share with the people that are listening to this very obscure recording?
Yeah, I didn't realize the time. It's flown.
Yeah.
I think I know that the one thing I think that's the most important thing, and maybe it's sort of the undertone in all the things I've talked about, is that I think we need much more discipline in the product space, in the work that we do. Like, we really have to come at it from a disciplined perspective and understand that we are doing very high impact work that affects not just the company, but the people in the company, right? And we can't do it in a half-assed way. We can't go, we'll put it on the roadmap, or we'll, whatever. Like, I think we really have to take it seriously. I think product leaders have to step up and really understand that their job is to be a leader and lead the organization and to help drive the necessary changes in an org to kind of leverage the skills that are there, but to enable product success. And I think that, like, I've said this a couple of times, if most sales orgs were run the same way as most product orgs are run, companies would go bankrupt in about a year. Like as much as we can talk about sales, most sales orgs are disciplined, much more disciplined, in my opinion, than most product orgs. They have funnels and they have reviews and there's structure. And, I've seen people like really execute well. Whereas for product, because we don't have that kind of hard measurement the way sales orgs do, right? Our job isn't on the line necessarily if we don't deliver, the way sales orgs need to deliver.
And there are so many. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to mention that there are so many different types of forms that a product can take shape in. I think that would be very added complexity as well. What do you think? I mean, I've never come across a situation where a product would be the same as in another.
They're different, but sales can be very different as well, right? There's different kinds of sales orgs, structures, and so on. But what I'm saying is that we, and when I say we, product people, product leaders, have to create disciplined, structured, functional organizations, because no one else will, right? Like, you don't hire a sales leader who says, "Hey, who wants to tell me how to set up my organization?" Right? Like, they come in and they, if they have a sales methodology or sales structure, how they break up roles, BDRs versus sales reps versus other people, like, they put that structure in place, they put the execution model in place, and they get their job done. And it's easier in some way. I mean, it's a very tough job, sales, but it's easier because there is a clear measure of sales performance, right? Marketing has a clear measure of marketing performance. Product doesn't have that. And you can't substitute delivery for what product is doing, because product is not about simply delivery. Product is about setting up the company for success. But product leaders need to think about that and how they are contributing to the overall success of the org, not just in the now, but in the future, right? Steve Johnson, who you may have heard of, is a longtime pragmatic marketing instructor. Now he works as a consultant. He has a line that says, sales is responsible for this year's revenue, product is responsible for next year's revenue. And I like that kind of metaphor. Like, we are thinking about next year and the future so we can set up the company so sales and marketing can do their job next year, right? Our work has downstream impact, and people need to understand that. It's not just about discovery and delivery. It's about creating an environment where the company can be successful. And I think that's really at the heart of it. There's been far too much focus on delivery and go back and create a roadmap and deliver type of thing, whatever you want to call it. I think that discipline needs to come in. And to me, product leaders are business leaders. And that they have to think of themselves and understand that they are business leaders, right? Product planning is business planning, right? Product success is business success. Like, that connection to the business and the business aspects needs to be explicit and clear, and people need to understand that, right? Product management should be business management, not just working on the product.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more with what you just shared. I think it's very valuable. I think there's also a lot more to hear from you on these topics. So maybe I already mentioned you are quite present on LinkedIn and on Medium. How can the people find you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. If you share my LinkedIn URL, people can reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me, ask me questions. I try and be really available and responsive, and then
Yes,
we can take it from there.
obviously. I will also make sure that we mention the posts that we touched upon in this interview, and to make it available to the people who want to reach out and to read your content. So yeah, from my point of view, I want to thank you again. I found it very interesting to talk with you in this way in real life. It's quite funny to talk to the people that I read about or read from online, and it's different to talk to them in such a session. So thank you again very much for your time. And
Yeah, thank you. This was great. I really appreciate you asking me to come on.